Talia had exactly 20 seconds before the captain turned on the fasten seatbelt sign and the executioners in row 2 made their move. Her manicured fingers didn't tremble, she was too professional for that, but the black ballpoint ink bled slightly into the porous fiber of the cocktail napkin as she folded it into a tight square. The paper felt flimsy, lighter than air, as if it might dissolve before she could deliver it. Around her, the first-class cabin hummed with the low-frequency drone of the engines, a lullaby of wealth and privilege. The soft clink of crystal against serving trays, the rustle of a newspaper, the scent of warmed nuts and expensive cologne. Just inches away, beyond the triple-paned windows, the pressure differential was lethal and the air was 50 degrees below zero. But in here the atmosphere was heavy, pressurized, and suffocating. Talia adjusted her navy cap and approached the aisle like she was walking toward her own funeral. Before the takedown begins, hit that like button if you believe in fighting back when the odds are stacked against you, and subscribe so you never miss a moment of high-altitude justice. Also, let us know in the comments where in the world you are watching from today. Now let the takedown begin. The cabin lights were dimmed to a soothing twilight blue, designed to lull passengers into a false sense of timelessness, but Talia Monroe remained wide awake. Her movements were a practiced choreography of servitude and surveillance. She glided down the aisle of the Boeing 777, her eyes scanning the first-class cabin not just for empty glasses, but for the subtle disruptions in the atmosphere that preceded trouble. Most of the passengers in the 12 luxury suites had already succumbed to the altitude, reclined beneath cashmere blankets. But the two men in seats 2A and 2B sat rigid, defying the comfort offered to them. Min Jae-hyun and Park Dae-sik had declined the champagne, the warm nuts, and the noise-canceling headphones. They sat with the coiled tension of sprinters waiting for a starting gun. Talia adjusted her grip on the silver serving tray, her instincts pricking at the back of her neck. She had flown this route enough to know the rhythm of business travelers, the loosening of ties, the heavy sighs of exhaustion. These men were not tired. They were hunting. She approached row 2, offering a fresh round of water, her smile fixed and impenetrable. The man in 2A, Park, didn't even acknowledge her. His gaze was drilled into the back of seat 1A, where Jang Woo-sung sat in solitary silence. Beside Park, Min was hunched over a tablet, checking his watch with mechanical precision every 30 seconds. "Water, gentlemen?" Talia asked, her voice a soft purr meant to disarm. Min looked up, startled. For a split second, his jacket fell open. It happened in the space of a heartbeat. As Talia leaned forward to place a coaster on the console, the polished chrome of her serving tray acted as a perfect mirror. In the warped reflection, she saw what Min had tried to shield. Tucked deep inside the inner pocket of his suit jacket was the matte black grip of a semi-automatic pistol. Her heart stuttered, missing a beat, but her hand didn't falter. She placed the glass down with a gentle click. As she straightened, her gaze shifted involuntarily to the tablet resting on Min's tray table. The screen wasn't displaying a spreadsheet or a movie. It showed a secure command channel. A high-resolution file photo of Jang Woo-sung sat next to a flashing red order. Execute Phase 2. Talia turned away, her blood turning to ice. The realization hit her with the force of physical vertigo. The silence of the cabin was no longer peaceful, it was predatory. The man in 1A wasn't just a passenger, he was a dead man walking. And at 35,000 feet, with the cockpit door reinforced and the air marshals on a rotation she couldn't predict, she was the only one who saw the executioner's blade hanging over his neck. She walked back toward the galley, the soft carpet swallowing the sound of her heels, her mind racing faster than the engine screaming outside. She wasn't just a flight attendant anymore. She was a witness. The heavy velvet curtain of the galley snapped shut, sealing Talia in a temporary sanctuary of stainless steel and coffee grounds. Her breath hitched, a jagged sound in the small space. She didn't have time to panic. The kill order she had seen on the tablet was running in her head, ticking away the seconds of Jang Woo-sung's life. She reached for a fresh cocktail napkin, the white paper stark against the metal counter. Snatching the black ballpoint pen from her apron pocket, she pressed the tip to the soft fiber. The ink bled slightly as she wrote, her handwriting hurried but legible, stripping away all pleasantries. "The men behind you have your picture and a gun. I saw the kill order. Do not turn around." She stared at the words. They looked absurd, like lines from a bad movie script, but the memory of the gun in seat 2B was cold and real. She folded the napkin into a tight square, the secret burning against her palm. With the mechanical precision of muscle memory, Talia selected a heavy crystal tumbler. She poured a generous measure of hibiki, the amber liquid swirling against the glass. She placed the note on the small serving tray, then set the cold drink directly on top of it. She took a breath, smoothed her skirt and pushed through the curtain. The cabin air felt thinner now, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on her arms stand up. The walk to seat 1A felt endless, a gauntlet run under the watchful eyes of the predators in row 2. She could feel their gaze on her back, assessing, dismissing. To them she was just part of the furniture, a silent, invisible servant. She prayed they were right. Talia reached Wusung's suite. He was still staring out the window, his profile etched in stone, the dragon tattoo on his hand flexing as he tapped a finger against the armrest. He seemed bored, utterly unaware that the hunters were breathing down his neck. "Your whiskey, sir," Talia said, her voice dropping to a murmur that didn't carry beyond the high walls of his suite. She lowered the tray. As he reached for the glass, lifting it toward his lips, the damp napkin clung to the wet bottom of the tumbler. Wusung frowned. He peeled the moist square off the crystal and unfolded it. The message lay exposed, the black ink stark against the white. Talia didn't move. She didn't breathe. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, the picture of professional obedience, waiting for the explosion. Wusung paused. The glass hovered halfway to his mouth. His eyes flicked down, scanning the text in a fraction of a second. A kill order. The doubt that had been gnawing at him for weeks suddenly sharpened into certainty. He remembered the hushed phone call Park had ended abruptly in the garage last Tuesday. He recalled Min's hesitation during the perimeter check at the warehouse, a 2-second delay that could have been fatal. He had dismissed them as nerves. He was wrong. They weren't nervous, they were preparing. The only sign that he had processed the death threat was a sudden, absolute stillness that fell over him, like a predator scenting blood. Slowly, terrifyingly calm, he raised his gaze to hers. The boredom was gone. In its place was a sharp, lethal intelligence that stripped her bare. For a heartbeat, the air between them crackled, a silent, electric acknowledgement of the secret they now shared. He didn't look back. He didn't check the reflection. He simply held her gaze and gave a single, imperceptible nod. The silent nod was the only contract they needed. Wusung set his glass down, not with a tremble, but with a clumsy, jarring force that shattered the silence. He groaned, a guttural sound of distress, and doubled over, clutching his chest. His other hand swept the crystal tumbler off the table, sending whiskey and glass crashing onto the floor. "Help," he rasped, the word strangled. "My heart." The reaction in row 2 was instantaneous. Min Jae-hyun was out of his seat before the whiskey soaked into the carpet. It wasn't concern on his face, it was opportunity. A medical emergency was the perfect cover, a chaotic moment where a target could die and it would look like natural causes. "I will help," Min announced, pushing past the partition, his hand already reaching into his jacket. Talia moved. She didn't scream for a doctor. She unlatched the heavy meal service cart she had prepositioned and shoved it violently across the narrow passage, wedging the wheels against the bulkheads to create a steel barricade between the cabin and the galley. "Sir, stay back," Talia commanded, her voice cracking with authorized panic. She locked the cart's wheels, trapping Park behind a wall of stainless steel and meal trays. The high walls of the luxury suites shielded the violence from the sleeping passengers in the rear rows. In the galley the ruse evaporated. As soon as Min stepped behind the curtain, away from the eyes of the cabin, Wusung straightened. The agony vanished from his face, replaced by a terrifying blankness. Before Min could draw the weapon fully from his jacket, Wusung surged forward. He drove his palm upward into Min's chin with a sickening crunch, snapping the assassin's head back. Min staggered, gargling blood, but he was a professional. He absorbed the blow and twisted, grappling Wusung into the narrow kitchenette space. They slammed against the ovens, a silent, vicious tangle of limbs. There were no shouts, only the sounds of wet impacts and straining fabric. Wusung had the skill, but Min had the weapon, now half drawn and leveled at Wusung's stomach. Suddenly the curtain ripped open. Park had vaulted over the cart. He landed in the galley, eyes wild, raising his own gun toward Wusung's exposed back. Wusung was locked in a death grip with Min and couldn't turn. Talia didn't think. She grabbed the handle of the brewing coffee pot on the burner, fresh, scorching dark roast. "Hey!" she screamed. Park turned his head just as Talia swung the pot in a wide, desperate arc. She didn't aim for the head, she aimed for the hands. The glass carafe shattered against Park's forearms, splashing a liter of boiling liquid across his face and chest. Park's scream was a high, animalistic sound that was mercifully drowned out by the sudden roar of the engines as the pilot adjusted altitude for the turbulence. He dropped the gun, clawing at his blistering skin. Woo-sung didn't waste the distraction. He twisted Min's wrist with a dry crack, seized the loose gun and fired 2 shots. The cracks were deafening in the confined space, but the roar of the engines swallowed the sound before it reached the main cabin. Woo-sung spun around, the weapon now an extension of his hand, and leveled it at the screaming man on the floor. The galley fell silent, save for the hiss of coffee burning on the hot plate. Woo-sung looked at Talia, his chest heaving, blood on his knuckles. "Close the curtains," he said. The smell of burnt coffee and metallic copper hung heavy in the pressurized air. Talia's hands, usually so steady when pouring vintage wines, trembled violently as she tightened the plastic flex cuffs around Park's wrists. The hitman was barely conscious, his skin red and blistering, whimpering softly on the lavatory floor. Beside him, Min's body was jammed in like cargo, limbs tangled and lifeless, a dark stain spreading across his chest. "Tighter," Woo-sung ordered. He wasn't looking at the men. He was washing the blood off his hands in the tiny stainless steel sink, scrubbing with the same detached precision he had used to snap a wrist. Talia yanked the zip tie, the plastic biting into Park's skin. "They're secured," she whispered, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears. Woo-sung dried his hands on a paper towel and checked his watch. "We are descending. Clean your blouse. You have 3 minutes." They shoved the lavatory door shut and locked it from the outside with the master key. Talia unclipped her ruined service apron and shoved it into the trash compactor. She buttoned her blazer to hide the few spots of coffee that had soaked through to her white shirt. She didn't have time to process the horror, she only had time to survive the landing. When the wheels touched down at Incheon International Airport, the jolt felt less like an arrival and more like a gavel coming down. The plane taxied to a remote hangar, far from the commercial terminals. Talia peered out the porthole. There were no baggage carts, no refueling trucks. Just a convoy of black SUVs and a dozen men standing in formation on the tarmac. A mobile stair truck surged toward the plane, latching on with a metallic clang. As the cabin door hissed open, the humid air of Seoul rushed in. The men didn't wait for the bridge to secure. They swarmed up the metal steps with military efficiency. They moved past Talia without a word, heading straight for the lavatory at Woo-sung's signal. Talia stepped back, clutching her passport against her chest. "I need to file a report," she stammered, looking toward the exit. "The police? I have to tell the captain?" Woo-sung stepped in front of her, blocking the aisle. His presence was a physical wall. "The captain has been instructed to report a medical emergency. He will be compensated." "I'm not a part of this," Talia said, her voice rising. "I'm getting off this plane and I'm going through customs like a normal person." She tried to step around him, but his hand shot out, wrapping around her wrist. It wasn't a rough grip, but it was immovable. "Look at me," Woo-sung said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low register. "My men control this patch of concrete. But inside that terminal? The syndicate owns every badge. Customs, immigration, police, they are waiting for you to walk through those doors alone." He pulled her a step closer, invading her personal space. "If you walk into that terminal, you are a loose end. You won't make it to the taxi stand." Talia looked into his eyes and saw no deception, only a cold, hard calculation. "You are a witness," he said. "And right now, the only place you are safe is with me." He didn't wait for her consent. He turned and pulled her down the stairs toward the waiting armored cars. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a sprawling expanse of marble and glass that hovered 50 stories above the neon pulse of Seoul. The penthouse was breathtaking, a masterpiece of modern architecture, but to Talia, it looked like exactly what it was, a fortress. She stepped out, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. The walls were floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the city's skyline, but the glass was thick, bulletproof, and sealed tight. It was a beautiful, air-conditioned aquarium. "My passport," Talia said, turning to face him. Her voice was steady, though her hands were clenched at her sides. You still have it. Wusung walked past her to a wet bar carved from a single block of obsidian. He didn't answer immediately. He poured 2 glasses of water, eschewing the alcohol this time. He looked tired, the adrenaline of the flight fading to reveal the bruising on his jaw where Min had struck him. You are free to leave whenever you wish, Wusung said, placing a glass on the low coffee table. But the moment you step out of this building, you cease to exist. Is that a threat? It is a forecast. He sank into a leather armchair, gesturing for her to sit. She remained standing. In my culture there is a concept, a debt of life. You saved mine today. I am obligated to ensure yours continues. He picked up a remote, and a hidden screen descended from the ceiling. It displayed the personnel files of the 2 men from the plane. Min Jae-hyun, Park Dae-sik. Wusung recited the names like a curse. They were my shadows. Handpicked by my uncle 5 years ago. I trusted them to watch my back. He looked up at Talia, his eyes dark and unreadable. If the knife came from inside my own house, then the hand holding it belongs to someone powerful. Someone who can pay off the police, the airport security, and the border agents. Talia looked at the faces on the screen, the men she had bound with zip ties. If you can't trust your own men, who can you trust? No one, Wusung replied. Except perhaps the one person who has no stake in this war. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You saw the gun in the reflection. You noticed their nervousness when I did not. You have eyes that see what others ignore because you are trained to serve, to anticipate. He pointed to the door. Option 1. You take your passport, you leave, and the police arrest you as an accomplice to murder. You have already tampered with a crime scene and failed to report a homicide, Talia. You are part of this. Talia looked at the door, then back at the city lights glowing through the impenetrable glass. It was a gilded cage, but outside was a slaughterhouse. I'm not a consultant, she whispered. I'm a flight attendant. Wusung took a sip of water, his gaze locking onto hers. Exactly. No one looks at the help. And that is why you are going to help me win. The basement of the fortress was nothing like the penthouse above. It was a windowless box of poured concrete and white tile, smelling faintly of bleach and copper. Park Dae-sik sat zip-tied to a steel chair in the center of the room, his face a ruin of blistering red skin where the coffee had scalded him. Wusung stood over him, his knuckles raw. He had been asking the same question for 20 minutes, punctuated by calculated violence, but Park remained silent. The hitman's eyes were swollen shut, his breathing ragged, yet he held on to his silence with the desperate loyalty of a man who knew talking meant death for his family. He won't talk, Wusung growled, wiping blood from his shirt sleeve. He reached for a heavy wrench on the metal tray. He accepts death. Stop, Talia said. Her voice was thin but firm, cutting through the heavy air. She had been standing by the door, hugging herself, nauseated by the brutality. But she had also been watching. She had spent a decade reading Passengers, distinguishing the nervous flyer from the angry drunk, the tired businessman from the grieving widow. She looked at Park and didn't see a monster. She saw a man who was terrified not of what was happening in this room, but of what would happen outside of it. You're treating him like a soldier, Talia said, stepping into the light. He's prepared for torture. It's part of the job description. She picked up a bottle of water and a clean towel. Ignoring Wusung's warning hand, she knelt in front of the chair. Park flinched, expecting another blow. I know it burns, she said softly, her voice dropping to that practiced, soothing cadence she used during turbulence. Your body is already going into shock. You inhaled the steam. When the swelling hits your throat, you'll suffocate long before the infection sets in. It will be slow. She poured a little water onto the towel and gently dabbed a spot on his neck that wasn't burned. Park let out a shuddering breath. You were disposable, Talia whispered, leaning close so only he could hear. They sent you onto a plane with a live tracker. They didn't care if you got caught. They didn't care if you died. They probably expected you to. Park's head lolled forward. No, he rasped. The promise? There is no promise, Talia interrupted, her tone sorrowful but matter-of-fact. Whoever sent you knew you wouldn't walk off that flight. Men who pay their debts don't hire suicide bombers. She held the water bottle to his cracked lips. He drank greedily, choking slightly. When he pulled back, the defiance was gone, replaced by the crushing realization of his own expendability. "Who sent you Day-Sick?" she asked gently. "Who signed your death warrant?" Park looked up blindly, tears leaking from his swollen eyes. "The chairman," he whispered. Woo-sung stiffened, the wrench clattering to the floor. "Which chairman?" Park's head dropped to his chest. "Your uncle. Jang Min-ho." The silence in the room was absolute. Woo-sung stared at the wall, his face draining of color. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was blood. The man who had raised him after his father's death, the man who sat at the head of the table every Lunar New Year, wanted his head. The adrenaline that had sustained Woo-sung through the interrogation finally crashed, leaving behind the jagged reality of his injuries. In the master bathroom, under the harsh vanity lights, the bruising on his ribs from the galley fight was blooming into a violent shade of purple. He sat on the edge of the marble tub, shirtless, wincing as he tried to clean the split skin on his knuckles. "Stop," Talia said, taking the damp cloth from his hand. "You're scrubbing it like a stain. It's a wound." She stepped between his knees, her movements efficient and authoritative. The flight attendant was gone, the nurse was present. She dipped the cloth in antiseptic, her touch light as she dabbed the raw flesh of his hand. The same hand that bore the dragon tattoo, now swollen and angry. Woo-sung watched her. For years, the only hands that touched him were paid for, either to give pleasure or to inflict pain. Talia's touch was neither. Was careful. "My uncle," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "He hosts the syndicate gala tomorrow night. It is the annual gathering of the 5 families." "Sounds like the perfect stage for a takeover," Talia murmured, focusing on wrapping a bandage around his wrist. "He timed the hit," Woo-sung said, his voice hard. "He raised me to be a puppet. He thought that when I finally inherited my father's seat, I would let him rule from the shadows. But I cut his strings." He looked at Talia, his eyes cold. "I am legitimizing the business, shutting down the trafficking routes he loves. I have become a threat to his illegal income. That is why he had to act now. He wanted me dead before the party so he could announce his succession and return the family to the gutter. He expects a funeral," Woo-sung continued. "He will turn the gala into a memorial service for his tragic nephew." Talia finished the bandage and looked up. For the first time, she wasn't looking at him with fear or professional detachment. She was studying the map of scars on his chest, old bullet wounds, knife slashes, the history of a violent life written in raised white keloids. "You're a map of close calls," she whispered. Woo-sung reached out, his bandaged hand cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed her lower lip, a gesture so intimate it sucked the air out of the room. "And you are the only reason this one didn't end in a morgue." The distance between them evaporated. The sterile silence of the bathroom was replaced by the heavy thrum of attraction. He saw the steel beneath her softness, she saw the man trapped inside the monster. He wasn't just a killer, he was a king in exile, bleeding on his own throne. "If I go to that gala," Woo-sung said, his eyes searching hers, "I walk into the lion's den. I cannot take guards. They might be compromised." "You need someone who doesn't belong," Talia finished for him. She didn't pull away from his touch. "Someone invisible. Someone they won't look at twice." "No," Woo-sung corrected, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Someone they will stare at so hard they won't see the knife coming. You won't be a waitress tomorrow, Talia. You will be a queen." "We go together," she said, the decision settling in her chest like a heavy stone. "We crash the party." Woo-sung nodded, leaning his forehead against hers. It was a surrender and a promise. "Then let us prepare a suit of armor." The grand ballroom of the Shilla Hotel was a sea of black tuxedos and diamond chokers, a Shark Tank masquerading as high society. Talia stepped through the gilded double doors, her hand resting lightly on Woo-sung's forearm. She had traded her navy uniform for a gown of liquid gunmetal silk that clung to her curves like a second skin, a slit running high up her thigh concealing a ceramic knife strapped to her leg. She looked like a trophy, an American heiress brought in to impress the investors. She felt like a wire pulled tight enough to snap. The room went quiet. The murmur of conversation died as heads turned. Jang Woo-sung, the man who should have been a corpse in the Pacific, was walking down the marble staircase, alive and terrifyingly whole. "Keep smiling," Woo-sung murmured, his voice a low vibration against her ear. "They are smelling for fear." "I'm not afraid," Talia replied, her chin lifted. I'm working. She scanned the room, her eyes moving with the professional detachment of a flight attendant surveying a cabin. She noted the exits, the security detail near the kitchen, and the cluster of men surrounding the bar. In the center of it all stood an older man with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Jang Minho, the uncle, the chairman. He didn't flinch. As Woo-sung approached, Minho spread his arms wide, a performance of familial love that chilled Talia's blood. Nephew. Minho boomed, stepping forward to clasp Woo-sung's shoulder. We heard there was trouble with your flight. I feared you would miss the toast. Turbulence, Woo-sung said smoothly, his gaze locking with his uncle's. But I have a talent for surviving rough air. Minho's grip tightened briefly on Woo-sung's shoulder before he released him. And who is this stunning creature? Talia Monroe, Woo-sung said. My new, strategic partner. While the men exchanged veiled threats wrapped in pleasantries, Talia's attention drifted. She wasn't listening to the words, she was watching the mechanics of the room. Minho raised his left hand, adjusting his cufflinks, a small, sharp movement. Immediately, a waiter broke away from the line near the bar. He moved toward them with a silver tray bearing 3 flutes of champagne. To anyone else he was just staff. But Talia had spent 10 years walking aisles with a tray in her hand. She knew the rhythm of service, the fluid weight distribution, the invisible way a good server moved. This man was wrong. He held the tray too tightly, his knuckles white. He wasn't looking at the glasses to ensure they didn't spill. His eyes were fixed solely on Woo-sung's throat. He wasn't balancing service, he was carrying a payload. As he drew closer, Talia saw the telltale stiffness in his right arm, the way he angled his body to shield the tray from the rest of the room. He wasn't a waiter. He was the backup plan. To family, Minho announced, raising his glass high. And to the miracle of survival. The waiter extended the silver tray toward Woo-sung. It was a subtle movement, a slight rotation of the wrist presenting the flute on the far right, the one closest to the waiter's thumb. Woo-sung reached for it. Wait, Talia said, her voice cutting through the hum of the orchestra. She moved with the speed of a striking cobra, her hand intercepting Woo-sung's midway. Let me. She grabbed the stem of the glass, but her grip was intentionally loose. As she lifted it, she allowed the flute to slip from her manicured fingers. It hit the marble floor with a crystalline shatter. Champagne splashed across the hem of Minho's tuxedo trousers and soaked into the antique Persian rug. You clumsy, Minho started, but the insult died in his throat. Where the golden liquid touched the wool rug, it didn't just soak in, it hissed violently. White smoke curled up from the floorboards, carrying the acrid, stinging scent of chemical corrosion. The fabric turned black and disintegrated in seconds. The ballroom fell into a terrified silence. The guests stared at the smoking hole in the carpet, then at the man who had ordered the toast. Woo-sung looked at the dissolving rug, then up at his uncle. His expression was bored, disappointed. Industrial acid? A bit clumsy for a family reunion, uncle? Minho scrambled backward, colliding with the waiter, but there was nowhere to run. At Woo-sung's signal, the doors burst open. Not the hotel security, but Woo-sung's new Praetorian Guard, men vetted by Talia over the last sleepless week. They seized the chairman and the assassin waiter before a single guest could scream. The room watched in stunned silence. Minho had broken the sacred truce of the gala with poison. No one moved to save him. Take him to the basement, Woo-sung ordered, adjusting his cuffs. We have much to discuss regarding the line of succession. As his uncle was dragged screaming from the room, Woo-sung turned to Talia. He didn't care about the staring crowd or the ruined gala. He took her hand, kissed the knuckles that had just saved his life, and offered her a rare, genuine smile. Shall we go home? Months later, the Gulfstream G650 was cruising at 45,000 feet, soaring above the Pacific in a silence that money alone couldn't buy. Talia sat in the cream leather captain's chair, her legs crossed beneath the mahogany table, the soft hum of the private jet surrounding her. The navy polyester uniform was a distant memory. Now she wore an elegant champagne-colored dress that fell smoothly over her frame. Between them on the polished table, a crystal decanter rested beside 2 heavy glasses. The Singapore expansion is too risky, Talia said, her voice calm but certain. The harbor master is nervous. I saw it in his eyes during the video conference. He'll fold if the police apply pressure. Woo-sung, seated opposite her in a dark tailored suit, studied her for a moment. He didn't question her assessment. He had learned that Talia noticed things invisible to everyone else. Then we cut him loose, Woo-sung said quietly. He reached for the decanter. Allow me, Talia said reflexively. No, Woo-sung replied, gently stopping her hand before pouring the amber liquid into both glasses and sliding one toward her. You don't serve anyone anymore, Talia. She took the glass, glancing out the oval window at the endless horizon where the deep blue ocean met the sky. She wasn't just a passenger on this flight. She was steering the future of the empire. Talia raised her glass, the light glinting off the ring on her finger. To turbulence, she said softly. Woo-sung touched his glass to hers. To the queen of the sky. They sipped their drinks as the jet soared forward, leaving the old world far below. Talia Monroe had finally stopped serving, and started ruling. But I have to ask, do you think Talia made the right choice joining the criminal underworld, or should she have taken her passport and run when she had the chance? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please share it with a friend who loves a high-stakes romance. Until next time.